Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm your host, John Townsend, and today's recipe is, well, it's an 18th century creme brulee, but with a twist. We'll find out just what that is. Thanks for joining us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. This recipe is again from the Professed Cook by Claremont. This is an 18th century English cookbook that is a translation of a slightly earlier French cookbook. So this is French cooking in England in the 18th century. This one is called fried cream, and it is, well, let's find out. Let me read this for you. Boil a pint of cream with sugar, lemon peel, coriander seed, cinnamon. Reduce it to half, then mix 6 yolks of eggs beat up and sift with a sieve. Bake as all the others. There are multiple recipes that are kind of similar to that. Only rather more when it is cold. What does that mean? Cut it into small square pieces or in any other shape. Flour them to fry and serve them with a sugar glaze, which is done easily by strewing over a little powdered sugar and a hot shovel. This can seem a very confusing recipe. In fact, we've read it multiple times and it's like, okay, now what is it? What are they really trying to get at here? What's this? You kind of have to interpret both, looking at similar recipes in this cookbook and trying to figure out what they're leaving out, what they're putting in here. But we're making a custard, we're baking it, then we're letting it cool down, slicing it up, frying it, and then putting a sugar glaze on the top. This one's a little more difficult. Should be fun though. Certainly sounds good. Let's get started with that first step. Let's start with this custard mix, or at least the beginning of our custard mix. We've got some cream here. There's a lot of cream here. 2 cups of cream. I need about 1/2 cup of sugar. So I've got just standard old white granulated sugar here. There's 1/2 cup. We have our cinnamon. I'm gonna go ahead and just break 1 stick in half, toss it in. We got some coriander seeds. This isn't ground coriander, it's a whole seed. It'll get stripped out later on with our sieve. Some lemon peel, and lemon's kind of a real important part of this. So we're gonna put in several lemon peel pieces here. And now this is gonna go on the fire. Low and slow on this. We're going to slowly bring it up to just about the boil. Depending on the temperature of your fire here, you've got to be really careful that this mixture does not burn, this cream does not burn in your pan. So I'm going to stir it a good bit. And if you let it come to boil too much, it'll froth up and try to go over the top. Then you've gotten too hot. So you can either lower the fire or pull this pan away. We're trying to reduce this down a good bit, at least as far as the recipe is concerned. So we're trying to drive off some of this moisture and sort of get all these flavors infused in it, because we're going to take these spices out later on. So we're infusing the flavors into this. Once it's reduced down to the amount, we're going to actually take this, we're going to let it cool down a little bit, and now we can incorporate our egg yolks. Or in my circumstance, I'm basically doing it the other direction. I'm whisking up my 6 egg yolks and slowly pouring the mixture in. I don't want to cook those egg yolks, so that's why we let this cool down a little bit. Depending on how you want to temper your eggs, you might not have to cool down this far, but I let it cool down this far to make it easy. Once it gets about halfway there, you're good. You can dump in the whole mixture, whisk it, and then we're going to separate this out with a sieve. These are very common in the 18th century. This sieve is a horsehair sieve, and I'm using it to both get rid of all the spices, as well as all the little bits of egg that might not be so smooth in that mixture, which is very common in an 18th century recipe, which we don't necessarily take all the time for in a recipe today. But we're going to sieve all that out so it's a very, very smooth mixture. And now this is ready to bake. Now, when we're doing something like a crème brûlée, we might bake this in a water bath. But in this circumstance, we want it to be kind of firm. So we're going to go ahead and just bake it up in a Dutch oven in this circumstance. The recipe actually kind of calls for baking it in a dish with coals on top. Well, that's exactly what we've got here. A Dutch oven will allow us to bake it from the top and the bottom. You will probably just bake this in your modern kitchen. So it's going to be much easier for you to bake this at a low temperature, maybe 300 degrees. And a vessel like this, the amount that we've done here, will bake about 30, 35 minutes. But we're going to get this Dutch oven going and get this baking. So after our 35 minutes in the oven, it might not look totally solidified, but it will start to solidify as it cools off. And once this is totally cooled off and it is nice and firm, we can then cut it up into our shapes or pieces. I'm just gonna cut simple squares out of this, but if you wanted to do some fancy shapes, you can do that. Then once this is cut up into our pieces that are about 3/8 of an inch thick or so, we're gonna just do a quick flouring of this, and then they go into the oil, and we're gonna go ahead and deep fat fry these. You could try pan frying them, but we're gonna deep fat fry these at the typical temperature of 375 or so. We're gonna bring that oil up to temperature, drop them in. It doesn't take very long for them to cook. You don't want them to turn dark brown necessarily. It depends on the flavor you're looking for. But a nice medium brown. We're gonna pull these out and of course let them sort of dry, cool off. Then they get powdered sugar put on the top. And then, as the directions call for, a hot shovel, a red hot shovel gets, or a salamander, gets over these to melt the sugar. Of course, today we'd probably use a little blowtorch or something like that. It's much easier, but in the time period they would use a red hot shovel to melt that sugar, turn it into almost like a little glass surface on the top of these little mini creme brulees. Now the sugar that we put up on top of these is kind of like a powdered sugar today, but not quite that fine. You kind of want one of those finer than a standard granulated sugar, but not quite as powdered sugar as you get. This is kind of sort of half ground in a mortar to make it a sort of a very, very fine sugar. And that's what we put on top. Well, there they are. They're beautiful. They smell good, but they took a lot of effort to cook down the cream and then make the custard mix, and then you bake it, and then you have to cool it and let it flour it, and you cook it. Let's hope they're really good. Well, let's try one of these out. They're really nice in that you can, pick them up with your fingers. That's probably, the nicest feature these particular guys have. Nice little crunch on top. Very tasty, very tasty. Very creamy, lots and lots of lemon flavor in there. I really enjoy this. It reminds me of the lemon cream that we've done in a past episode. Very good. Now the real question for me on these is it worth it? I mean, if you've done a creme brulee before, you sort of get to the halfway point, and then, you'd have that whole, those little ramekins filled maybe with the mixture, and then you put the sugar on top and then torch it, and boom, you're done. You'd skip that whole step of flouring and then frying, and then I'll tell you, it's probably not worth it. I think if I was going to do it, I would just go straight to the ramekins and torch it and not worry about it. The whole, getting the oil, having oil ready to go and then deep fat frying them, I don't think it's worth it. But tell you what, these are super tasty. They are right out of the cookbook. But if you go another 5 or 6 recipes back in the Professed Cook here, you'll find a straight creme brulee recipe that's also very, very time period oriented. We tried this out because it sounded very, very interesting and like it was going to go someplace we didn't expect. It was still an excellent, and I love these, experiences where you got to try it out. Unless you try it out, you just have no idea where you're going. If you're looking for an 18th century cookbook that is got, French inspiration, or basically is a translated French cookbook from the 18th century, can't recommend this one more. The Professed Cook, you can find it on our website. Another episode that is so similar, and you will love this one. It's even easier, but a lot of the same kind of flavors. Check out this lemon cream episode.